I preach to you this morning. I'll be happy to be very transparent from the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu. In 1978, psychologists Brickman, Coates, and Janoff Bowman published a study finding that lottery winners were not significantly more happy than people who had been paralyzed in an accident. So then where is the spring of happiness? The blessedness that Jesus spoke of in today's good news. That same word, blessed, can be translated happy. But I don't think it's happy-go-lucky. I think it's something else. Happy are you when you are poor, hungry, weeping, or excluded on account of the Son of Man, Jesus. For to you belongs the kingdom of God, and you will be filled with laughter. I have always enjoyed returning to the Beatitudes. I find an endless depth in them. And this time, as I journeyed with them, I read in them permission to be happy. Permission to be happy in the midst of anything. The Book of Joy is a conversation between two people who have been through tremendous suffering and who radiate happiness. The book is drawn from a 5-day visit that they had in Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives in India. It is a visit between two self-described mischievous spiritual brothers. And they often, there's a video that you can watch that shows the two of them together, and it's full of deep belly laughs. And often they're scolding each other with wide grins. And often they're holding hands, reaching out for one another, not just holding hands, but tenderly touching each other, holding each other's arms in love. By rights, said Tutu along the way, the Dalai Lama should be a sourpuss. A sourpuss. The Dalai Lama needed a translation on that one. He should be a sourpuss. You have been in exile for 50 what years? 56 years, said the Dalai Lama. From a country that you love more than anything, why are you not morose? It is because in very large measure, said the Dalai Lama, said Desmond Tutu, you have transmuted what would have been totally negative. You have transmuted it into goodness. The Dalai Lama, in his person, shows us the permission to be happy in the midst of anything, permission to have a different reaction than the world expects, or that the world says we should have, sometimes wants us to have a sour reaction. And the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, they're often wagging their fingers at each other during this conversation with mischievous delight as they're talking about being happy when they shouldn't be. Mischievousness that's so wonderful because they slip past what the world expects. Hey, said Tutu to the Dalai Lama, you act like a holy man. And the Dalai Lama, he said, yes, I have been a refugee. The 100,000 Tibetans are refugees. He said, if I had stayed in Potala Palace in Lhasa, I would have been a holy man. And I would have been in what you say, a golden cage. But because I am a refugee, look at the opportunities that I have had to go into the wide world, to meet many people. He said, it is better for me to be a refugee. And I noticed that the Dalai Lama doesn't compare his life as a refugee and an exile to the life he might have had if China had never invaded Tibet and he'd still lived in a palace. He compares his life as a refugee to his life if he'd stayed in the palace and still been there today, stuck in a chair. In similar fashion, Desmond Tutu might have been a wretched man for all that he's experienced. He grew up in poverty, if you didn't know that. He grew up with a father who was an alcoholic and abusive. He survived polio and TB. He remembers the day that his father went out to buy wood for his own coffin. And he spent a life ministering with people who'd been beaten and killed during peaceful protests, and listening as the head of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, listening to awful stories from the times of apartheid. But he speaks with joy. He says the question is not, when you experience suffering, how to escape, but how do I turn this into something positive? He even has spoken these challenging words, saying, it seems actually that nothing beautiful in the end comes without a measure of some pain, some frustration, some suffering. This is the nature of things. This is how our universe has been made up. And then both of them sitting there in this joy, they speak of the same way that they've come to it from their different lives, from two different traditions. To have joy, or what they say, lasting happiness, in the midst of anything, look outward to others. Why are they not each a sourpuss? Because they have spent their lives looking outward, looking at the opportunities presented, as they say, for compassion. They use this word compassion. And in English, the way that the word comes to us in our language, compassion, suffer with, to suffer with. The Dalai Lama makes this distinction. Many Tibetans have become refugees. And when I look only at that, then I worry. But when I look at the world, there are many problems and more suffering. When we look at the same events through a wider perspective, we will reduce the worrying and our own suffering. The Dalai Lama was emphasizing, when he said that we're not alone. Their conversation leader and the co-author with them on the book, Douglas Abrams, he noted the Dalai Lama was not speaking that he was contrasting his suffering with others. Oh, my suffering's nothing compared to these others. He was uniting his situation with others. Do you feel a distinction? He was not contrasting and putting his own suffering aside, but uniting his suffering with the suffering of others. At one point, Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, during this 5-day visit, they went together to the Tibetan Children's Village, which is a village filled with children who are orphaned by death or orphaned by having fled their country without their parents. And there was a girl who stood there. She might have been 13 years old. And she stood before the two of them and told the story of leaving her family and the pain that still causes her years later. And she began to cry and couldn't go on with her story. And the two men had two different responses. The Archbishop said, "I'm sorry," and looked sad with her. And the Dalai Lama looked peaceful. And he spoke about she was here now, and look at the opportunities that she had now. Take courage. Have courage. And then you will be well. And the Dalai Lama's close companion and translator, Jimpa, he spoke separately about this afterwards to say, notice the difference that one of them spoke as a pastor with comfort, and one of them spoke as a religious and national leader, the Dalai Lama, with courage. These two different postures. And I thought how like the Beatitudes, that in both of those postures, notice they didn't flee. Neither of them was fleeing from the suffering of that girl. But they were offering these two ways to hold the moment. And I see both of those in the Beatitudes. Jesus is offering comfort for the moment and courage to lift up your eyes and look forward. Beatitudes are a uniting compassion invitation. If you want to be happy, then you must pass into your own suffering. He doesn't say, "Blessed are you who are hungry, because you'll never be hungry again." He doesn't say, he's acknowledging things that are going on in the world, sufferings that are at this moment. If you want to be happy, you must pass into your own suffering, your own poverty, your own hunger, your own exclusion from the world on account of your closeness with Christ. And then, because you have come close to these things and passed into them, because you have united yourself, suffering in yourself with the suffering in each of your neighbors, then you may pass through and transmute your suffering into compassion. Beatitudes are, especially in Luke, I think, I find they're a little different in Matthew, but these Beatitudes in Luke are stark. Maybe because they need to be stark in order for Jesus to give us such a surprising permission to be happy in the midst of anything. Permission to be happy while you are a lifelong refugee. Permission to be happy as a lifelong minister to the downtrodden. I propose that perhaps as you read the Beatitudes, you know best which permission you need. You know if you need comfort. You know if you need courage. If you need to come close to your own poverty or your own exclusion, whatever the face of your own suffering, the invitation stands in the Beatitudes. Come and claim your own need there, and then stand up in it. Stand up through it, entering in to your need. Expand your awareness with the Dalai Lama, with Desmond Tutu, with Jesus. Be united with your neighbor. And there, in that uniting, enter, as Jesus promises, the kingdom of God, happiness, the company of such happy saints as the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu.